Ben Bradley. This is not the first time that Ben Bradley has been to Harvard. Indeed, a graduate of Harvard College, as four of his fathers and grandfathers before him. Bradley studied Greek and English here before entering a career in journalism that led by some circuitous route in which he happened to purchase a house on P Street when he returned from a tour in Europe, purchasing a house in Georgetown, to a relationship with the junior senator of Massachusetts, then John F. Kennedy, and to a situation in which he became the newsman whom President Kennedy most enjoyed. As editor of Newsweek, an editor who led that publication to national prominence, and then as managing director of the Washington Post, who played a key role in the ascendancy of that journal to national and international prominence, Mr. Bradley has for more than 3 decades lived at the frontier of relations between the press and government. Ben Bradley's position in history, if it were ever uncertain, was guaranteed by his pivotal role in pursuing what had been written off as a third-rate burglary until the full story was out, a story that revealed such a gross abuse of presidential power that Richard Nixon was forced to resign. Students here at Harvard will always be reminded of this achievement, since it was immortalized by Jason Roberts, in the movie All the President's Men. So it's with great pleasure tonight that I welcome and present to you the real Ben Bradley.
I have a standing rule that if Jason Robards' name gets mentioned in the first 3 minutes, it's going to be a bummer. You just passed, Dean. You just passed. It really is ridiculous for an editor to sit up here in front of this crowd. Editors are not supposed to be doing this. They're not trained to be public speakers. We have a certain facility in answering questions, most of them mean, from our own reporters. But we are nervous and, as you will see, quite ill-prepared to make formal speeches. It is really an outrage that none of you know the name of my predecessor, who was a totally distinguished journalist and for many, many years. And his name was Russ Wiggins, and you should remember it. He came along at a time in history when there were different presidents and there were different actors, I guess. But anyway, I'm really not only in awe but honored to be in front of you. Jack Kennedy would be laughing if he could see this whole deal. But I'd like to talk to you about the only thing that I know. I only have one speech. This is another danger of coming to a place like this where they run you like Seabiscuit in various races all day long. And one is trained as a child not to repeat oneself. And half of what I'm going to say today, I know damn well I've said at least once and probably twice before today, and I'm going to say it again tomorrow before I get out of town with my life. Anyway, if to govern is to choose, as some great thinker once said, this school really exists to teach the art of choosing. In my particular line of work, the choosing is very primitive, it's quite limited, and it is almost always done under less than optimal circumstances. You either print it or you don't print it. There is never enough knowledge to make that decision with complete security. There is seldom enough time, and there are always 500,000 mothers out there exercising their time-honored right to second guess. But never mind, to print it or not to print it, that is the question that's on my mind. The sound of the second guessers is invariably a little more shrill a little louder in a campaign year. Hardly a candidate now alive, but feels the press has done him dirt. They all agree with that well-known vice president, especially esteemed for his views on the press, who once said, "Nothing can now be believed which is seen in a newspaper. That man who never looks into a newspaper is better informed than he who reads them, inasmuch as he who knows nothing is nearer the truth than he whose mind is filled with falsehood and error." And he wasn't that idol of the Fourth Estate, Spiro T. Agnew, incidentally. That was a man named Thomas Jefferson. So, the second guesses have been around quite a while. The easiest of the journalistic decisions are the ones in which you have already given your word not to print it, generally because you know the information would not be available to you without such an assurance. I dropped names very uncomfortably, but I had an example of that last night when I got back from a seminar that Sally and I had been attending in West Virginia, and the telephone rang, and it was the White House saying that the president would, I can tell this only because it's now been, like all other off-the-record things, it's now apparently on the record. The president wanted to see a bunch of correspondence, and it was off the record. The only decision I had all night long was whether to go. He's got the A-bomb, he's got the A-shares, it's his party, he sets the rules. I either go or don't go, and I decided to go. What he wanted to discuss, the interesting part of this, that it was a Sunday, and the second interesting thing is that there's an election in Wisconsin on Tuesday, and you cannot divorce the two. He wanted to talk about Gotts Badet's latest message or non-message, and he talked to us for an hour, and we said it was off the record. As I arrived at my hotel today, there was a phone ringing at the check-in desk, and it was my old friend Carl Bernstein, who now works for ABC, and he said, "How are you?" And I said, I said to Sally, "I wonder what he's calling about." And he said, "Well, what'd you do last night?" And I said, "Well, I didn't see you there." And he said, "Who was there?" And I said, "I'm not going to tell you." And you have this crazy anomaly of a professional journalist not telling what the hell he knows. Most of us spend a good part of our life avoiding those no-win situations. Anyway, I'm told that he called somebody else, and one of the other persons who was there, and that person said, "Yeah, well, Bradley was there, and the guy from the Tribune, and the guy from the New York Times, and the editor of the Star, and Jack Nelson of the Los Angeles Times." So this off-the-record discussion is apparently more or less on the record. Anyway, that wasn't very complicated as print or no-print decisions go, because I'd agreed not to print it. And almost always it comes out anyway. The decisions that stick in my craw, the ones that are the toughest to make, the ones that get you in the most trouble, are those which involve the national interest, the national security, or at least those that are said to involve the national interest and the national security. The ice gets a little thin for an editor when a president or a secretary of state or secretary of defense says that the national security is endangered by something you are about to print, while you, a humble Greek major who learned right from wrong at the feet of the great John Finley, believe otherwise. As I said, this is in my craw, and I'd like to spit it out tonight. We've had a recent case, a confrontation is really the best word, which is to the point in which I think you might find interesting. It started, remember, we're talking now for the next few minutes about national security or matters that allegedly involve the national security. This one started, you won't believe it, on the Today Show on January 9th, 2 weeks after the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Senator Birch Bayh of Indiana was asked if the United States had in any way been trying to help the Afghan rebels. The question was particularly appropriate because Bayh is chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, which is or is supposed to be, and in this case apparently was, routinely informed by the CIA of such matters. Here is Bai's reply verbatim. Quote, "I think I can say that when a significant number of people in Afghanistan were determined to try to exert themselves and to try to have some say in what kind of government Afghanistan should have and not have it imposed on them by the Soviets, we did take certain steps to help them to do what any group of citizens should be able to do in a country," end quote. Okay? Normal amount of senatorial obfuscation there, but basically pretty clear, right? We did take certain steps to help the Afghan rebels. Right there, the record should show that at any given time, 20 million Americans are listening to the Today Show, and God knows how many of them are Soviet spies. Later that morning, a bunch of us who had heard it began to wonder, what did that mean? What did that mean? We did take certain steps. What steps? We assigned a reporter by the name of Mike Gettler, who had covered the Defense Department, who was recently returned to the United States after 4 years covering NATO and Germany. And we said, poke around there, see what you can find. And a couple of days he came back and said yes, that the U.S. was supplying some weapons, mostly small arms, and the simplest anti-tank weapons, mostly Soviet-built, mostly from Egypt, which had sort of weapon-type relations with the Soviets for a while. He didn't know much more. We didn't know much more. That wasn't what we call in the Washington Post a tube ripper. If you don't know what a tube ripper is, it is a story that is so hot that the subscriber rushes down and rips his paper out of the tube, which says Washington Post, to get at it. But it was still a pretty fair piece. And we thought we had no problem because Senator Bai had shared this information, or most of it, the guts of it, with 20 million of our fellow Americans. I thought it was easy. Wrong. Phone rings, it's Harding Carter. Now, Harding's a friend. I've hired his brother 3 times, and I tried to hire Harding if the truth was out, but he's got an agent now, and it's a little difficult to get to compete. He said, please hold the story. The Secretary of State would like to talk with the Post the next day. And I said, why? And I have been through this ritual before, and I think I know the answers because the Russians will be great, will hurt, all this. Secret, national security. Anyway, he said, God damn it, just hold it and talk to the Secretary of State tomorrow morning. You know the way he talks. So we talked to it. We did hold it. Figure you've got to in those cases. We have a decision-making process at the Post in this kind of case, which might interest you. We decide just to make it easy and to get the thing going, to print it. We then convene a group of as many as a dozen people who are completely expert in it. I think you'll be surprised to know how expert they are. Some of them have been covering the State Department longer than many of the secretaries and assistant secretaries. Some of them have been covering the Pentagon much longer than those assistant secretaries, many of whom came in with the new administration and used to sell Buicks in Omaha or someplace like that. Not particularly qualified. We talked to the Secretary of State. He made his case, and he had not heard of the Bai interview, which is really quite stunning when you consider that someone told him to call Bradley and beg him not to do it. We convened our group. The pluses, the minuses, we decided to go. We were ready to do it. As a courtesy, we called Carter back and said we were going to run it. 20 minutes later, we're ready to go. Meanwhile, we've done all the things that we should do, like call the Grahams and Donnie Graham, who's the publisher, tell him, because we don't want him to be surprised. Phone rings, and it's Jody Powell. Would you please hold it and give the president a chance to talk you out of running it? You know, and you know it's not going to be a whole lot different, because the president has presumably been told the same information by the same people who told the Secretary of State. But I don't see how you can refuse in a situation like that. So we said, yes, we would hold it one more time. And we talked to the president. It became clear halfway through that conversation that he had no idea about what Senator Bayh had said. And there's no reason he should. I hope to God the President of the United States isn't watching the Today Show all day long. I get very nervous when I'm in that room and I have to write things down, or else my mind goes totally blank when I get there. So I said, would you like to know, sir, what we're going to say? So I said, yes. He said, yes. And so I said quickly, there's a slip, isn't it? I said quickly that we have the story that we are supplying weapons to the Afghan rebels. They are small arms. They are small anti-tank. They come mostly from Egypt. They're mostly Russian-built. And he said, you mentioned President Zia. I said, what about President Zia? I didn't know about that. He told us nothing about President Zia, and he said, I'm not saying that I particularly want to see this story in the paper tomorrow, but if you print what you just told me, you won't hear a peep out of us. Now, finally think of that for a minute. It's been kept out of a major newspaper for 48 hours because in the last analysis, everyone is scared to death that the president will get him if it appears, and it turns out that he doesn't mind. Now, everything's all quiet. We run the story. Zero impact. Nobody pays much attention to it. Makes about a line or two on the CBS News. AP runs a story this big. Most editors don't play it because it quotes the Washington Post, and they don't like to credit any other paper than their own. Everything's quiet after that until Barry Goldwater, God love him, is called upon to testify before the Senate Select Intelligence Committee, whose chairman had tipped us off to the story in the first place. Goldwater is in the highest dudgeon, and he suggests now he's not under oath because they're not under oath. They don't put each other under the oath up there. But he suggests that reporters and editors who come up with chapter and verse, I'm quoting now, come up with chapter and verse of what we heard in a top secret hearing be tried for treason. Nice man, but he doesn't listen to the Today Show, and he doesn't look before he leaps. But you knew that already. Let me tell you a couple of other stories because I'm going to prove to you that if I die in the process, that claims of national security, in my experience, don't often amount to it. In fact, I've been at it since 1946, which is 34 years, minus 2 years as a not very successful diplomat. And I have never heard a claim of national security that really was a pure national security matter. Anyway, let me tell you about the story about King Hussein. Bob Woodward, who if you heard of, came to me one day about 2 years ago now and said that, did you know, the way he talks like very Midwestern, he said, did you know that King Hussein was on the CIA payroll for $1 million a year? And I said, I did not know that, no. And he said, well, he is. And furthermore, he said that Hussein had been on there for 20 years. This is a man in his early 40s. I said, you must pursue that, Bob. That's the way we talk to each other down there. And good old Woodward, you don't have to say much more than that before he goes. And the next thing I knew, we had another call from Mr. Powell, or we had the first call from Mr. Powell, and he said, would you please hold that story and give the president a chance to talk you out of running it? So we went over there, Woodward and I, the next morning, again with our little list of things to say. And the following was written. The first thing he did was to confirm it, which was interesting, although we were absolutely sure of it. When the President of the United States tells you, you are really more than sure. Second thing he told us was that he didn't know about it. And this was in February, 6 or 8 weeks after he'd been put in office, which meant that 3 briefings by George Bush, then head of the CIA, had failed to bring that matter up. 6 or 7 briefings by Henry Kissinger, who knew about it, had failed to bring that matter up. And I think, it didn't hit me with the full impact that it hit me later, but I think when the President of the United States doesn't know that he's got a Middle Eastern king on the payroll, walking around money now, not arms money or economic aid, walking around money, $1 million, and he's going in there and talk to this king without knowing that about how to settle the Middle East. I think that's a stunning story. He said, and his name is all alone in my particular roll of honor. He said, "I'm not going to tell you to print it or not print it. I'm not going to ask you to print it or not print it." It was perfectly obvious that he didn't want it printed, and we went back after we talked to him, convened our decision-making team, which was very impressed with my own report about how he didn't know about it, and we decided to print it. We called up Powell and said reluctantly we had reached this decision. He muttered an oath, came back to us and said, "Would you wait a day? Because Cy Vance, the Secretary of State, is going to land in Amman, Jordan tonight. And we would like to have him see the king before the king hears about this story." And we said, "Okay, we'll do that." We waited a day and printed it. Nothing happened. Nothing happened at all. The national security was not bothered. Would you like to hear about the Pentagon Papers, which was a rather interesting case of national security, when for the first time in the history of the Republic, the administration went after 2 newspapers, successfully stopped them from printing, never been done before, in the 190, I think 7 then years or 6 then years of the Republic. You wouldn't believe the setting. We're in a courtroom. There's black crepe over the glasses, over the windows on the corridor, presumably to prevent some spy from reading lips and seeing all these state secrets, the most recent of which was 5 years old. We had to have, the 13 defendants of the Washington Post had to have a snap security clearance before we were allowed into the courtroom to attend our own trial. The government's case is being put in by one of those assistant secretaries from Omaha, and the judge, Gary Gassell, got sort of bored with the pace of the evening, and he turned towards this witness, whose name I've mercifully forgotten, and he said, "Let's get to the heart of it. What's your best shot against the Washington Post? What one story, he talks like that, what one story in the 4,000 pages of the Pentagon paper, we had 4,000, the New York Times had 7,000, we had only had 4,000, and this sick look spread over this man's face because he obviously hadn't read a damn page of it, and he didn't have a clue as to what was their best shot. But so they asked for a recess, and they huddled over in the corner, and we wondered what they were going to say. We'd brought a couple of source books down with us just to make us feel secure. And finally, they said they were ready. They reconvened. The stenographer read the last question, and what's your best shot? And this guy paused and in a very stentorian voice said, "Operation Marigold." Well, now, we've all watched enough television to know that if it has operation in it, it's pretty serious, right? Operation Marigold, I'm sure you all know what it was, but in case you've forgotten, It was an operation by President Johnson to enlist the aid of some foreign diplomats to go to Hanoi and see if Ho Chi Minh had a deal that he would tell them about that he wouldn't tell Johnson about. It was an unsuccessful operation. But that was their best shot. Life magazine, the following week, while this case was wandering up to the Supreme Court, had an article by Harold Wilson, who was then Prime Minister of Britain, and the title of it was Operation Marigold. We had, in these books that we had with us, we scurried around and found 6 references to it, including in books that had been already published. By the time we got to the Supreme Court, we found 25 references of it. That was the best shot that they had for the first time in the history of the Republic closing down or preventing a newspaper from publishing. Richard, I'm getting to the end of my list, and it's very long, but I'm going to cut it down here a minute. Richard Nixon's favorite case after Watergate, you remember, that was a case of national security. That's why he couldn't talk to us about that. What he said was the single worst violation of national security in his presidency was the New York Times' story revealing for the first time that we were bombing in Cambodia. Now think of that for a minute. Just think of it as a question in linguistics. Who is being bombed? Okay, they know they're being bombed. So we're not keeping the secret from the Cambodians. There's a war going on down there. It's being fought in Cambodia, but the people around are North Vietnamese, so the North Vietnamese know about it. The godless communists know about it, from whom all secrets are made to be kept. There isn't anybody except the American people who don't know that Cambodia is being bombed. My own personal favorite in this area involved a story the Post did about 2 Soviet sub-chasers who were chasing an American submarine 1,500 yards off the coast of Russia. And in the process of this little game, they bumped into him. And they bumped into the submarine, not into each other. And the American submarine suffered minor damage and came home. And our Pentagon correspondent heard about this, and he said that he thought that was a good story, and I agreed with him. And we published it, and there was immediately an off-the-record background briefing held at the Pentagon with lots of imprecations against the Post about national security and this. But just, go through the same exercise again. Who are we keeping this secret from? The Russians obviously know that they didn't hit a whale. Okay. Right about now, it is fair to ask, who the hell is Bradley to decide what's in the national interest and what's in it? What is truly national security and what is national or maybe even strictly presidential embarrassment? That, it seems to me, a perfectly fair question. You probably haven't time enough to hear the heartwarming story of my rise from Harvard student to destroyer officer to copy boy to etc. But in a serious way, editors aren't elected and they aren't appointed by the state. That's fine with me. But editors are responsible. They're responsible to you, and I hope I've suggested how, in at least a few cases, we exercise that responsibility. We do question our leaders, our words, and their actions. Sometimes we question them without quarter, but hopefully in the true national interest. In each of the cases I've talked about, the government exerted its own incredible power to keep a story away from you. They like to phrase it, keep it out of the newspapers. And the newspapers exerted their own power, which is not inconsiderable, to print it. We had the power to tell the American people some truths about Vietnam, old truths though they were, to tell you that we were in a state of undeclared war with Cambodia, to tell you that we were playing tag with Russian submarines, the Russian sub-chasers, and to tell you that we had a king on our payroll. The press had enough power to do that. And it's up to the public, really, to judge whether the general welfare, the national interest, the national security was best served by the press or by the government in trying to keep it out. In each of these cases, the power to print it, the decision to go ahead and print it was painted as the power to damage the national security, when in fact it was only the power to embarrass the powers that be, namely the government. No American, much less a journalist, could be comfortable damaging the true national security. But the lesson here seems to me to be that the claim of national security is not necessarily the fact of national security, and that the power of the press to embarrass is one of the lesser dangers to the republic for which we all stand. Thank you very much. I'd love to answer any questions you have. Thank you. You don't have to do that. I'm plenty pleased. Yes, sir.
Cite a case where the national security would be impaired.
Well, we've done this, the what-ifs. The general answer to that is, you don't print the sailing times of troop ships. But, they don't get there anymore by troop ships, so you can print all the sailing times you want. I would not print anything that knowingly would cost someone a life. I would not knowingly print the name of a active intelligence agent. I might, in the Pentagon Papers, there were 2 intelligence agents named, and we did not print them. I saw Helms some time later and told him about this, and he just smiled. He said as soon as that study was ordered, that resulted 2 years later in the Pentagon Papers, those 2 agents were taken out. So, but I think we constantly don't publicize the president's movements in advance after after Kennedy's assassination. We don't do that. That doesn't seem to me to be a great moral issue. But I can envision a situation where you learned that 2 CIA agents were planning to kill Trudeau, and you knew that if you published their names, their lives might be threatened, but you'd tell somebody that you were going to publish their names in a couple of hours and get them out. I can't see anybody. Yeah.
How did they find out that you are about to fix them?
Well, because you go to check them. It's not fair in our business to not go to the source because you're scared you're going to get a denial. You've got to go there and say, I know this, and I would like your comment on it. And is it true? Is it not true? And by that time, the tom-toms are operating, and everybody in town, all the government people know that you're going. Yeah. It's got to be the House, doesn't it?
Yeah, the House, you're right. I'm sorry. Both Henry Kissinger and Gerald Ford tried to get that report expunged, or tried to prevent it from being published. Do you see that there was any harm in having that published?
I'm not familiar enough with it, but I would just almost instinctively, I would say no. If Kissinger wants to keep it quiet, I'd like to have it out. In all of this, we're talking about, we're talking about a manipulative process here. And I don't think anybody should be so innocent as to not understand that everybody's trying to manipulate the press. And the press quite often is trying to manipulate back. The thing to do is to know you're being manipulated, to know why. And it's quite easy to find out after you get the hang of it. He didn't ask me. I don't think he did ask. He asked Reston. Yes, he asked one person. We got to be sure what we're talking about. When you say press, I mean 1,750 newspapers and a few television stations. I think it would have been fascinated to me if he had asked me, that's an awful lot of power they got when they, because, yes, well, I think Reston does too. I think Reston would kill to have that one back. And Kennedy agrees. I mean, Kennedy said to him, if you'd only gone ahead and printed it. There's some people who would like you to speak louder.
Get the microphones on the four folks at this level and at the next level. So we're going to ask the people who are asking questions to step up to one of the microphones so the rest of the audience can hear.
Sir.
We have a case pending now in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, a young reporter from Medford by the name of Cassetti. It involves a reporter's privilege, or alleged privilege, for information. As you know, there's no reporter privilege like there is doctor, patient, lawyer, client. Under what circumstances do you feel the government has a right to inquire into a reporter's privileged information?
Well, I hate to suggest any. I think there are some. I think if someone told you as a reporter, you got a letter signed that the President of the United States was about to be assassinated, you don't have any doubt about that. They don't have to subpoena you to get that. Now work down on that scale. I think reporters have citizen responsibilities. I think if you witness a felony in progress, I'm not always sure of this now, but most felonies in progress, I think you have a citizen duty to get yourself involved. I even find that in a libel suit, if a newspaper is being sued civilly now, that a reporter should have to testify as to his source. I cannot call you a low, mean, mealy-mouthed, whatever, and then you sue me, and I'll say, I'm sorry, I can't tell you where I heard that. So I think that it ought to happen then. The thing to avoid is the fishing expedition when a lazy prosecutor or an evilly motivated prosecutor, Mitchell, wants to know what you're up to. When Spiro T. Agnew subpoenas the owner of the Washington Post, the editors, reporters, everything, trying to prove his theory that there's a leak in the Justice Department, which is redounding to his discredit. At the same time, he's sitting behind a green felt desk taking money in a bag, and he wants to subpoena me to find out whether I know that or who's telling me that. Can't happen. I'd go to the slam for that.
Well, in conclusion, could I ask you this? Would you, as a member of the establishment media,
I'm not very comfortable with that name.
you as a member of the Washington Post,
Okay.
Case and violence,
Sounds better somehow.
ask your lobbyists on the Hill to sponsor in the immediate future some sort of
no.
legislation to protect reporters?
No. And as a matter of fact, when asked, I have always said I am against the so-called shield laws, because it seems to me we can't say that the First Amendment protects us and then go and demand that the Congress of the United States give us some additional privilege, which they can then take away, and if they took it away, it would be in violation of the First Amendment. I think you've got a privilege, and you're not going to get as far as you want with it with the present Supreme Court. But I don't worry about it so much with the Post, because the Post is committed to fighting these cases. We've never answered a subpoena that invaded that privilege. We've never revealed a source under oath. We've had to threaten that Mrs. Graham would go to jail in our place because we really all worked for her and she owned us and owned our notes. That was Joe Califano's great argument once on in the Agnew case. We came up with this, I thought, fabulous theory. And you know, Dean, is it any good? I don't know. But it had a hell of a practical possible effect, because we would go up there and say, did you, as you do, and did you get a subpoena? Yes. Did you bring the documents required? No. Why not? Because they're in the possession of Catherine Graham, my leader. And then she would finally get down to Catherine Graham, and the gray-haired grandmother of two, widow, would go up there, and did this judge have a you-know-what to send this woman to jail? I don't think she would have. And that was Califano's theory. But anyway, he copped a plea in the middle of this, so all we did was give Califano $40,000 for his advice, and never tested the theory. This is probably good. How about take away your television station? And how about take away 3 of your television stations? Put $100 million on the table and test your owner's guts. How principled does a publisher get and does an owner get when the stakes are like that? Never mind the little. What didn't you tell me what Nixon had in mind when he was talking about the Washington Post is going to have damnable problems? I suspect he had, he had all these guys that were chairman of the Florida Creep and the chairman of the Florida Committee to do this and do that, challenging television station licenses that had never been challenged. I mean, there wasn't a television station in Florida that had ever had its license challenged in the history of television. And suddenly we have 2 stations there. There were 5 challenges against other Post 2 stations. But they can do worse things than that to you. They can, the president could have 5 people in to dinner and say, you know what the Post did? You know what those guys are doing now? And to spread that word around. When they were talking about putting some, seriously discussing putting some poison on, nobody, thank God, in real positions of responsibility. They were going to put poison on Jack Anderson's steering wheel, and that by the time he drove home, he lives way out in Maryland somewhere, the poison would be dead. Now, that was so testified to. So that's rather an extreme example of what they could do to you, and we may be a little bit paranoid, but there are plenty of things they can do to you. They can freeze you out of briefings, freeze you out of sources of information. They can not authorize your reporters' visas to go to Cuba. If they really take it... Well, I can't tell you what I don't know. In this crowd, not much. I think they're, just like every predecessor they ever had, they're trying very hard to tell us what they want us to know in a way that makes them look the best. They prefer, in this primary season, they like Mondays particularly, like Tuesday morning on the television. That'd be fine with them. But as long as you understand that, it seems to me that it's okay. Yes, sir. I got you next. I don't know. That's a moral judgment that I'd find terribly hard to make. I don't know what the social... in the last analysis, publishing a newspaper ought to have some social purpose. It really ought to make the world better. I don't see how that does it. In the case of that most often comes up, the Greek station chief, the U.S. station chief for the CIA in Greece, everybody knew where he lived. I don't think AG hurt many people by publishing that, and I certainly don't think he cost him his life. But when my grandchildren ask me what I did, I'd like to say something more than I went around publishing names of CIA agents. I just don't think it's a very noble occupation. And I don't know how you save lives by publishing the name of a CIA agent in Afghanistan. Tell me how you do that.
That
Okay.
Seems to me we can look at, say, the difference in the way the Japanese press, Latin American press talks about the trilateral commission and informing their populations within years in comparison to relative absence within the U.S. press. And then there are two.
Well, I mean, that, you know, we're talking absence in the U.S. press, 1,750 newspapers. How many of them do you read? It seems to me, I just see the Trilateral Commission. If I see one more piece about them, I'm going to go around the bend. Boring group of people, largely. Well, I don't, economic, surely I am limited by in my ability to act by economic factors. There are only so many people who work for the Washington Post. But there are hundreds of those factors. Time is another, money, obviously. I suppose that over a long haul, a newspaper begins to reflect the moral convictions of its owners and its editors. I don't deny that. Who had one? I think not. I looked at it, I read it, not for any love of the object of that story, but or dislove of him, but I looked at it and it seemed that was a classic case of a long run for a short slide. I didn't see what they got. I heard they spent $60,000 or $200,000.
First of all, I would like to thank you for a great picture, front page picture and story about the demonstration against the draft a week ago in Washington while the New York Times...
I did it for you, my friend. I did it for you.
While the New York Times saw fit to put it on page 24.
It was in our town, though.
Yeah, I thought of it. I got the impression that you, maybe incorrectly, that you have a certain amount of admiration for President Carter. I wonder if that is in fact the case. Could you maybe?
Well, I like to. I have a certain amount, sure. I don't want to get into this. I don't have anything to do with the editorial page. My life's goal is to tell you what's going on in President Carter's administration, in his head, and everything about it. You make the judgment. I am lacking in that area, and I would admit it. I was very late to come to the right conclusion about Vietnam. I admit that. But I am trained, I have been trained for 30-some years now in not making my opinions. My interest is what's going on. I've learned over the years that the people I fear, Richard Nixon, I didn't have to fear. In fact, he was fabulous as far as the Washington Post is concerned. We owe him a debt of gratitude we can never repay.
I don't read your paper daily, unfortunately, but I'd like to know how you handle stories from the Middle East. Do you treat it like a ping-pong game, that Sadat does this and Begin does that? Do you have a stated policy? Do you have correspondence in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem and Cairo?
Yes.
How do you handle it?
Well, it is kind of a ping-pong game. I don't know what exactly you mean by that. We have no policy that says the Middle East shall be covered thusly. We have a correspondent in Jerusalem, and we admire him enormously, and we run to a large degree what he tells us. He's not particularly popular with the Israeli authorities. His name is Bill Claiborne. We have a correspondent in Cairo who speaks Arabic, who's not particularly admired by the Egyptians. They both travel all over Hell's Half Acre. They see each other in places like Tehran and but it's you know, I suspect as well as anybody that it's a terribly difficult situation, and whatever you do, you're going to get an editor, especially in a place as political as Washington, is going to get a little visit. And the Jewish community is apt to visit you quicker and lean on you harder. I mean, I know exactly when my friend Max Kampelman is going to come in and say that we've committed some outrage. It's only recently that the Arabs have any spokesman, spokespeople at all. Now they've got some very good ones. But there's no policy about, I mean, there's a myth. It's one of the myths that, you know, Bradley is this or the Post feels that. The fact of the matter is that I think the Post is very unpolitical, quite unliberal in many ways. I think its liberalness now is in its selection of things to be interested in rather than its editorial pages less. No editorial page can lose a man like Alan Barth and be ever quite the same again. We're going to have to get somebody else like Barth. Well, you hope the pressure that you yield to is the pressure of the evidence. If I get a delegation that comes into me and say, why don't I do this and why do I do that, my heels go down, my hackles go up, and I'm going to come around real slow. Real slow. You got to show me. But to say that pressure is what Washington is about, that's how it runs. Somebody wants something, somebody tries hard to get it. The way to get it is to lean on somebody in 1,000 lovely, intricate, marvelous ways. And you've got to learn how to lean, and you've got to learn how to resist being leaned upon. It's good fun, and it's not hard. Mr. Higgins. Well, I wonder about that, by God. It's a good question. He said he'd stopped it. The president said he'd stopped it. Yeah, we've made efforts, and for some reason were not crowned with instant success. I would guess Hussein doesn't get it now, but it would seem to me to be amazingly two-faced for the president to say that he stopped it. He said that's the first thing that he did. I guess I forgot to say that. Dr. Choate.
Mr. Bradley.
Cousin Bob.
Cousin Ben.
Look out, here it comes.
You run a major corporation in the nation's capital. You've had to hire...
That's right away. Stop there. I don't.
You've had to hire a great many young and aspiring people over the last 10 years who hope to influence national policy. Would you tell us what is the proportion of women that you have in the employment of the Washington Post, and what is your advancement policy for women to higher positions?
We have 30... Dean, I think that question's also for you. I have... better back off that. We have about 37% of the 450 editorial newsroom employees are women. This is higher than it has been. It has not happened miraculously overnight. Some of this pressure that I talked about has been applied. Some of us, and I include myself in this, thought that because we had that our owner was a woman, that we had a little bit of a pass there until she turned very mean on us and started really hammering. We have 10 assistant managing editors. 2 of them are women. We've just appointed a Neiman Fellow to be an assistant national editor. An assistant foreign editor is a woman. The editor of the editorial page is a woman. 2 of the corporate vice presidents are women. I mean, I think we're getting there. We are also being sued. if you really, let me test your friendliness now. We are being sued by the Newspaper Guild. It's a class action suit on behalf of all women employees. I don't know all the women employees at the Post very well, including, this includes non-editorial. My information is that about 75% of them haven't got a goddamn clue that they are part of this suit and that they don't particularly want it. Nevertheless, it's at the EEOC, and there it will stay. I would say that more than let's see how I said that the young women that I am seeing now as aspirants to work at the Post on the news side, they're generally 2 or 3 years in the business. That makes them 24, 25, 26. There are more people, female, that I want to hire than there are male. This is not true of editors. That it's very, very hard to find a woman journalist who likes to be an editor. There's something that drives it, and it drives a lot of men, too, to that byline. Really good. It used to be in lieu of money. Now it's on top of money. But generally, we have had a tougher time finding the best editors, female. But this will be with us for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
One question, one complaint of people in public life, especially elected officials, is that they live in a goldfish bowl. They have no private lives. And my question is, how do you determine what is gossip and what is actually news and what reflects on a person's ability to act in public life? The example I can think of is with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the way things have changed, where people wouldn't photograph him, in a wheelchair. But today we can look on the front page of the Washington Post and find out President Carter suffering from hemorrhoids. And, I mean, I don't see what that has to do with his ability to govern the nation. And I'm wondering, what makes you decide that's news?
Well, you ever had hemorrhoids? I haven't, so I don't. That was a cheap shot, and I apologize for taking it. Look, the rules have changed about that. They really have. If President Carter was in a wheelchair, I think very shortly you would get sick to death of pictures of him in a wheelchair, but you'd be very comfortable with it. I think the question of people's private lives is haunting us. I think the word gossip confuses me. I was taught here at this institution that some of the greatest history ever written was gossip. Certainly in Latin and Greek, a lot of that stuff was gossip or thinly veiled gossip. So you can't. Most people who accuse us of running gossip also say, well, why the hell didn't you write about Kennedy and that girlfriend from Chicago? Well, you can't have it both ways. I think now there's a new magazine that's founded on gossip. People, isn't all that bad. It obviously satisfies a hunger. I think gossip about public figures replaced gossip about movie stars. I think when I was growing up, I remember going to the barber as a kid and reading something in a magazine, I don't even know if it's out, called Photoplay, and the column was called Cal York's Gossip of Hollywood. And I read every damn word of that when I was 9. And I didn't understand a hell of a lot of it, but there was a hunger for that kind of thing about the stars that we fantasized about. I think now, I haven't ready to make a thesis out of this, but I think now that public figures, rather than have the definition of public figures is now so broad that it includes politicians, includes certainly all the television people, and some of the print journalists.
How big the headline is, what page, so on. I wonder if you could give us an idea of the process by which you decide how to treat a story and the criteria you use.
Well, I was terrified by that more than anything else when I went over to the Post, because there's a legend in our business of the editor who missed the atomic bomb story, played it inside somewhere, age A30 or something like that. And his name is in all the textbooks, and I didn't want to be in there with him. The process is almost prevents it now in a large paper. We meet for the first time to discuss the following morning's paper at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when the editors of the various sections speak out on the stories that they have or hope to have, which they think are important enough for page 1. The orientation of that conference is page 1. In the next 4 hours, they work on those stories, and the night managing editor, who has just come to work at 3 o'clock, goes around, reads some of the carbons of the stories, and sees what stories bombed out, what new stories turned up, and he comes in at 7 o'clock for a much smaller meeting with about a dozen people, and has a dummy of what the stories would be on page 1. And I think you'd be fascinated. We sit and argue and call each other names and say it's the dumbest goddamn decision I ever saw, and you're putting this story out there, my God, into the textbooks you'll go, and this way. It's quite aggressive. It's called creative tension in some places. And by the time all of that's played out, we have a fairly good, I think. We still make really wretched mistakes sometime, and don't do things that I think should be on page 1, or I think later, the second day. Or Charlie C. writes us a note, says, how come you didn't play that on page 1? Mind you, a newspaper is a terribly vital and vibrant thing. It grows, its entire existence is in 24 hours. So the decisions that you reach at 7:30 or 7:45 before you go home could be dead by the time you arrived home. It changes 3 or 4 times during the night. It also reflects, you were waiting for me to say this, the tastes, I think, of the editors. The managing editor of the Washington Post is a reformed science writer. He's crazy about science stories. And if one of the leakies finds a new bone that tells us all that we're 2 billion years older than we were yesterday, that's on page 1, where I think it is a total irrelevancy. And he loves stories about 50,000 feet over Baltimore. There's an unexposed film which shows quasars or some damn thing rocketing around, which means that we're all going to die. And he's queer for what's the stuff in the spray, the underarm spray? He thinks that the world's going to end because of those things, and I don't. But he runs the story conference, so he's got one a week anyway, and then finally I say no. I like sports. I like politics. I like small community stories. I try to get that in there. Yes, sir.
You imply that you have a night manager.
Night managing editor. Yes.
Who makes some decisions after you go home.
Sure.
Describe your daily process with the Washington Post and what it involves, and what final decisions that are left in your hands.
Well, the last 4 hours, I come to work about 9:30 and I get home at 8. And the last half of the day, this is a normal day when there is no tube rippers coming up. I spend the first part of the day answering mail, administrative things, talking to foreign correspondents who are maybe at the end of their day, but not really involved in the decisions of tomorrow's newspaper. I generally have lunch with either a reporter or a news source, or maybe just a friend, and then as soon as I get back from lunch, we go on the stories. Well, throughout, I'm involved. There's an awful lot of silly administration, which, in goals. You people at the Harvard Business School ruined this business because Katharine Graham heard about MBOs and things like that, and every couple of months I've got to fill those things out. It's very hard to have a goal of as an editor when your raw material is not in your hands. I really require, I need a Richard Nixon to make the Post look good, and I don't control him. People is the big, I spend probably more time on people, talking to people, hiring, attitude talks, persuading people out, making people feel better, feel worse. Yes.
How well do you think the public is served by newspapers? You'd mentioned the large number of newspapers in this country, but that's somewhat misleading since all the small dailies get their information from the wire services, 2 or 3 wire services, and the large chains are gobbling up newspapers, smaller newspapers
Yeah.
every day.
I worry about that. But 2 or 3 wire services is 2 or 3 more than any other country has. We have really, I was saying to somebody else, and I'm scared I'm repeating myself, but when I started in Washington, there were, to be sure, 4 newspapers, and there are only 2 now. But there were 4 radio stations, and there are 49 now. 2 of them are all news. I think that there is, I believe in multiplicity of ownership, and I don't think that it's a good thing for a society to have 80 newspapers concentrated in one owner, especially 80 important newspapers. But it's not written anywhere they have to be 80 lousy newspapers. Sometimes it works out that way, but there are some chains that are quite good.
But don't you think that even though there are 2 or 3 wire services or a few chains, don't you think that they're all funneling news from a certain perspective, and it's the same perspective?
I don't know. There are 2 or 3. There's the AP and the UP. Okay, there's the.
Is there any real difference between them?
Yeah, I think one's better than the other, and especially in certain areas. Are they both establishmentarian? Probably, in a sense. You've got what is that, Jim? What is that news service? The Pacifica News Service, or is it? There's a Pacific News Service, which comes from a different, which the Post subscribes to. There is, but the public interest lobby in Washington is probably the strongest lobby there is now, or very close to it. So there's no lack of access to those people.
But why is it that you think a lot of Europeans who come to this country feel that Americans really don't know what's going on an international scale? That they
Well, look, I don't know what Europeans you're talking to. I've lived over there, and I think their newspapers stink. As a general rule, not to put too fine a point on it. I think that the state control over there is something that we wouldn't allow here. Some of those newspaper people, if they're newspaper people anyway, fail to tell you that they get in France anyway, they get an immediate 50% tax advantage over the average citizen. They fail to tell you that the Élysée subsidizes newsprint to the right publishers. I think there are some very good newspapers abroad, but generally they're not very good. And I think if you combine the good news services, the good newspapers, the good news magazines, and network news, I don't think there's a time in a history where the better quality news has been available to the Americans. I really don't. Yeah. That was an excessive statement, and I already take it back. Le Monde doesn't stink, and the Allgemeine Zeitung doesn't stink. Well, I don't think so. I mean, I would prefer our system. I think objectivity is a kind of a trigger word that fouls us all up a little bit. I think a word that's easier to understand and is as noble a goal, if not nobler, is fairness. I think you can be fair, and I think it's much easier to decide for a journalist to step away from the typewriter and make a decision as to whether he's been fair than it is for him to make the same decision about whether he's been objective. A fire is a big fire. If you haven't seen many fires, if you spend your life at fires, it might be just a fire. But from the early age You know, when you say or hear your kid brother or sister say that's not fair, you begin to think about fairness, and you know when you failed to make that phone call, when you ignored this piece of evidence, when you called a source that you were scared of and hung up at the first ring. All the tricks, you know, we know all the tricks, but I think, now you can cite me cases that where journalism is bad here, but I do think it's better. I really do.
Want to take one more question?
Sure. Did I leave somebody up there? I've been, how about two more? Okay.
Selection of what is news is undoubtedly influenced by the timely, by what might be considered right now to be important. In what ways, as a result of a sailor from down south being interested in developing a more timely source of news, namely the electronic media, do you think that the selection of news will be changed, and if so, will it be degraded?
I'm not sure I understand you. How does...
The electronic media I'm thinking of would be television with an all-day, 24-hour-a-day news.
Oh, I know. That sailor, Ted, yes. He's talking about Turner and what are the likelihoods of all-day television. I believe there's an audience for that. I'm wondering where the hell he's going to get his information. I have this strange feeling that off stage there's going to be some guy reading Time, Newsweek, the New York Times, the Washington Post, rewrite it, and out will come some pretty boy and talk about it. Martha, I shouldn't have said that. But I think that it seems to me, I mean, he's on HBO, isn't he? Or he's trying to get his own network of cable TV, and it's going to be some time before that has a real impact. One more. Yes, sir.
I'd like to pursue the question of whether newspapers are serving the public interest. And it seems to me that if, in fact, they are serving the public interest, as you seem to think so, I wonder why the government seems to be doing so badly. And I wonder whether the newspaper, the press doesn't really...
It's a disjunctive syllogism, isn't it? I mean... You don't know what a disjunctive syllogism is? All right, go ahead.
I wonder if the press doesn't really have the power of an assassin in a negative sense without having the ability or the responsibility to provide better alternatives.
Do you want to give us more power?
I question whether you really have the power that you think you have. I wonder if the press isn't a kind of paper tiger that's playing games with the government, or the government is perhaps toying with the press, because when it comes right down to it, doesn't the government, if they really feel threatened, have the ability to squash whoever they want to? And I wonder if the only newspapers that survive are the ones that have been careful enough to avoid going that far.
Well, I could do the easy thing and ask you to ask that question of Nixon.
I'm not sure.
I mean, he tried, and
I don't know that he really tried. I would think that if a president...
Boy.
It seems to me that I can't think of any government in history, I'm not a historian, but I can't think of any government where the press has taken over the government, but the governments often take over the press.
Ergo?
Therefore, the government, I think, has a lot more power when it comes to a crunch than the press.
You got a hell of an idea there, though. I mean,
well,
let's thank Ben Bradley once more for an excellent exposition.